Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Ruki Nuhal Ravikumar, Director of Education at the Cooper Hewitt, and I'm really happy to have all of you here today. As you can see, it's an exciting time at the museum with Nature, the Triennial, which has 60 plus projects that make us think about the interaction of design and nature. This exhibition is actually also open at the same time in the Netherlands at the Cube Museum. And our idea was to create a global conversation on nature and where we need to be going next. You can hear me, right? I'm going to keep going. Yeah. But today we have a partnership with TEALEAVES, who brought together a great panel of speakers. And we're always happy to work with TEALEAVES because they aim to educate, enlighten, and there was one more, enchant. And at Cooper Hewitt, we aim to inspire, educate, and empower. So we have a lot of E's in there that bring us together. But while we're on the topic of gardens, I thought I'd give you a few facts. You are actually in Andrew Carnegie's modest home. So welcome to our home. But I hope you've also spent some time in the garden, and I thought I'd give you a few facts about the garden to set up the context for this talk. In the garden, the Triennial actually has two large-scale site-specific installations, one of which is the Tree of 40 Fruit, and you're going to get to hear from Sam in a little bit. The garden was originally conceived in 1901 as an open space and garden for Andrew Carnegie's wife, Louise, and it was one of the largest private enclosed gardens in the city. The original garden included a small lawn to the west and a larger garden to the south where Louise Carnegie cared for her azaleas. And the wisteria that she planted is actually still blooming today. And as Andrew Carnegie's health declined, they actually put in a putting green. The present name is the Arthur Ross Terrace, which it was redesigned in 2014-2015 by 2009 National Design Award winner Walter Hood. Interestingly enough, if you walked in on 90th Street, you maybe have seen a church right next to the museum. Did you get to see that? That was actually land owned by Andrew Carnegie, and when he gave the land to the church, he gave it with the agreement that they would not build a steeple so that it would not cast a shadow on the garden. So as you step out, take a look. That church, the Church of Heavenly Rest, actually has no steeple. But it's a beautiful day, so as we talk about gardens and you're inspired to protect the outdoors and to love it even more, I'm thrilled to introduce Lana Sutherland. She's the co-founder and CEO of TEALEAVES. We also have on our panel today Patrick Lewis, director of the University of British Columbia Botanical Garden. We have Barbara Ambrose, Ph.D. and director of the laboratory research. She's the editor and botanical review of the New York Botanical Garden. And we have Samban Aken, associate professor at Syracuse University and designer of the Tree of 40 Fruit. So with that, I will hand it over to the panel.
I just want to take a really quick moment to thank our friends here at Cooper Hewitt. Honestly, it's such a wonderful place to cohabit with them. And by that I also mean, I was interested because between the gardens and Cooper Hewitt here, walking through Cooper Hewitt is actually like walking through botanical gardens. It really is. It's inspiring, it provides knowledge, and it also, I think, provides each of us a hope for a better future as well. And then on top of that, I just wanted to say, they really curate the people here just as amazingly as they curate the exhibitions that they share with us as well. So if any of you ever have a chance to meet Ruki or all these amazing people, I can see Michelle and Megan, so I'm going to call out to them as well, and all these fabulous people here, really do not pass up the opportunity because they're just the most beautiful people and most knowledgeable people you'll ever have a chance to meet. So please do talk to them. And with that, I'm going to put it over to the real stars of the show here as well. And I think we're starting with Patrick from UBC Botanical Gardens.
So I'm going to start out by saying that there's very, very few people who actually have a degree in biomimicry, but one of them is here, and it's not me. I asked her to leave. She refused. Biomimicry is a relatively new term. It was coined about 20 years ago by Janine Banyas. It's the study of nature as a means to meet the environmental, social, and economic challenges facing humankind. It's not an attempt to copy nature. It's a way to understand and draw inspiration from principles of design that have evolved over hundreds of millions of years.
Designers and artists and engineers and scientists should always come to botanical gardens. We see ourselves here at the UBC Botanical Garden as really a hub of innovation. People who are developing medicines, we work with poets and visual artists, all sorts of different designers.
You could look at botanical gardens as just phenomenal libraries. Instead of containing books, they contain the most amazing plants.
Right now, there's something in the neighborhood of 300 to 400,000 different kinds of plants. That kind of innovation should tell us something about, how we can design the world.
People have been looking to nature for inspiration in designs, in art and science forever, from earliest people. And I do think that a lot of disciplines have turned away from it. We haven't learned to pay as much attention to the natural world. I think it's a rediscovery for a lot of us, and I don't think it's something we'll turn away from again.
So I'm going to give two quick examples of what I think are remarkable plant adaptation. This is not supposed to be the slide, but we'll work with this anyway. This is for fairly obvious reasons. The arrow is pointing is a stone plant. I think it's the reason it's called a stone plant is quite obvious. It's in the Namibian desert. These. I'm going to step away from. Can you hear me? Yeah. This is obviously a variety of stone plants, lithops. These are actually modified leaves. The majority of the plant lives underground. It lives there because of reasons of moisture conservation, things like this. Is a very hostile environment. But like almost all living things, it has to have sunlight to survive. So those splits between the leaves are actually called leaf windows, and they carry the light down into the leaf itself in underground, where it needs that to survive. So the split, the leaf window, is actually a highly specialized group of cells that carry this light down. And the reason I put this up is that, when we talk about design, like in here at Cooper Hewitt today, there's issues of design for architecture here. How do we move sunlight within buildings in a sustainable manner? So this is a quaking aspen. It's a common member of the willow family, and many of you would have seen it. Its leaves tremble even in the slightest wind. They move like that, offering possibly a far more efficient way to capture energy. It would be interesting to have windmills that actually trembled like aspen leaves. This is the same plant, and I say plant in the singular. That's one plant. That's possibly the largest life form on Earth, and it may be one of the oldest. Some scientists believe that its root system dates back 80,000 years. So that means that if it's true, it was 65,000 years old when humans came to North America. This is the ultimate monocrop. That organism weighs over 13 million pounds, right? Every single tree you see there is identical. They are all genetically identical. Its only real threat is humans. But how has it done this? How has it managed to survive pests and viruses and the vagaries of time? What is it about this plant that allows it to do that? And what does that say about our chances of survival? What can we learn from this that will aid our survival? Right now, that we know of, there's about 400,000 plant species in the world. They're adapted to almost every environment on Earth, and their adaptation and resilience provides us with food, air, medicine, building materials, energy, unsurpassed joy, and unimaginably vast catalogs of possible solutions in this, our time of need. Botanical gardens are the libraries that hold these catalogs of survival techniques. Gardens have collected, conserved, and studied and cared for books of nature for 500 years. So I want to give you a couple more examples. You don't have to go to Utah to see the trembling aspen. It's actually just down the road in New York Botanical. The lithops, the stone plants, they're there too. There's 155 varieties at the New York Botanical. They're only just a few blocks away. These libraries are very accessible. So I want to just change tack a little bit. This fabulous tree lives in the forest in Costa Rica. When I look at it, I see majesty and beauty, but I also see a nutrient delivery system that we have never come close to achieving. There is no way that humans could build such a structure. But other people have seen other things in it. This is an algorithm that leads to a decision tree. That was how one engineer who works in machine language saw this tree. That was the inspiration they took from it. Similarly, the bird of paradise, which many of you have seen, and I'm sure you've seen in botanical gardens, you might have even seen in people's homes. When you look at that, I suspect you don't see self-opening Venetian blinds or screens, and yet that's exactly what it's been developed into. These are hingeless systems that open and close according to need and the light distribution on them. There's roughly 3,000 botanical gardens in the world. 40% of them hold about 30% of the world's plant species. But currently, 88,000 seed-bearing plants are in danger of extinction. That's 20%. That's 1 in every 5 seed-bearing plants in the world is now in danger of extinction. As a group, botanical gardens are committed to changing that. But as a species, entirely dependent on the diversity of life and the diversity of plants, humans must be committed to changing that. That's the only way we can do this. Thank you.
Yeah. So, good afternoon. My name is Barbara Ambrose. I'm a botanist. I work at the New York Botanical Garden up in the Bronx. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my research and hopefully give you a larger flavor of the type of work that we're doing to explore and discover all the plants of the world before they disappear. So this is, don't ask me what my favorite plant is. It depends on the season, depends on where I am. But this is my favorite plant in the spring. It flowers in the spring in the glass house at the New York Botanical Garden. It's called the jade vine. It's Stronglodon. And whenever I look at this plant, I think that there is nothing that we can really innovate, that we can design as humans that nature hasn't already done. I mean, this color is a mint fluorescent green with purple stems. And the color is the most unreal thing. It's very difficult to capture. You just have to go see it in the spring. It's the most amazing thing. And so when I see a plant like this, I study plants, but what I'm really interested in is how are they built? What can we learn from them? Because their logic of their development and survival is very closely linked to our own survival. So one of the things I study are leaves. And you don't have to be a botanist to recognize a leaf. A leaf is a flat, laminar structure. It's usually green, and its structure is very well suited to its function. So plant leaves, they breathe, but they also can't lose water. So the surface, the structures, the stomata that they use to take in air are on the bottom part of the leaf and not the top, because otherwise it would lose all of the water. And then transpiration, where the water is a waste product for plants sometimes, gets also lost through those stomata, but it doesn't dry out the plant. So you don't need to be a botanist to know what a leaf is. But when we look at the fossil record, it looks like leaves evolved at least twice and up to 12 times within land plants. And so with my research, what I try to understand is there one best solution for making this leaf? Is there only one way to build a leaf, or are there multiple ways to build a leaf? And so far we found two very different ways to build leaves, and for me that's very interesting that there's two very different solutions to come up with the same structure. One of the other things that I've studied is flower evolution. So Darwin considered the evolution of flowers an abominable mystery. So flowers appeared in the fossil record 125 million years ago. There were no flowers before this, and they all suddenly appeared. Right? So you just imagine no flowers at all, and all of a sudden you have this massive radiation of flowers. Where did they come from? How do you build them? So through my research and the research of many other people over the last couple of decades, we know that there's one common genetic network that builds all flowers. The same exact genes build all flowers, no matter how diverse they look. And if you take away that network, if you take away the genes that build the flower, what you're left with is just leaves. So leaves are sort of this ground plan, and then this developmental network is put on top, and it's redeployed. And now what we're doing is the same genes that build flowers and flowering plants are also found in ferns that don't have flowers. So we're trying to investigate what are they doing in the ferns, and can this help us solve this mystery of the origin of the flowers. One of our other projects is on Ginkgo biloba. Many of you will know this plant very well. It's throughout the city. And this is another term coined by Darwin. He calls these plants, and plants similar to this, living fossils. And that's because the fossil record of ginkgo goes back nearly 300 million years. And the thing that's most astounding is 300 million years ago, ginkgo looked exactly the same as it does today. And to put that into context, the first dinosaur fossil dates back to 240 million years ago. Dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, and the ginkgo persisted. This is massive amounts of land masses moving apart, crashing together, mountain ranges rising, CO2 temperatures fluctuating wildly, and this plant on the outside looks exactly the same. And so what we're doing is we're sequencing its genome to understand what does an adaptable genome look like, what can we learn from the structure of that genome to help our own survival. And so the last project I'm going to talk about sort of touches back on what Patrick was talking about, is how many plant species there are. So just want to sort of orient you. This is a small representative of all living organisms on Earth. There's supposed to be an estimated more than 8 million living organisms. We've named about 2 million of them. So that means there's 6 million we haven't named. You'll all, I'm sure, have heard about the UN summary of their upcoming report that's coming out, with 1 million species going to go extinct in the next several decades if we don't do something. So imagine, we've only named 2 million of them. So we don't even know what we're going to be losing. So just to orient you on this tree of life, first thing I want to tell you is that this shows you plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and you can see that they all have a single common origin 3.5 billion years ago. We are all made up of the same 4 bases of DNA, the A, T, C, and G, that build every single living organism, and we have a common origin. if this is here, this is the plants. There's, as Patrick said, there's 400,000 named plant species. And to put that into context, there are 40,000 named vertebrates. That includes mammals, reptiles, birds, fish. And only one of these points on this tree of life is us. 1 point out of those 2 million known species. So there's an estimated 80,000 more plants to be discovered, and we know that we're losing habitat very rapidly, and we don't know what we're losing. So at the New York Botanical Garden, in our herbarium, we have 7.8 million specimens, and these are plant records. These are pressed plants, and they go back 200 years. A plant that was pressed 200 years ago looks the same as one that was pressed last week. There's a lot of information on these herbarium specimens. It is the name of the collector, where it was collected, when it was collected. Herbarium specimens are collected when they're reproductive, so that way we know when plants were flowering, when they were fruiting. So this gives us a record of, so if we can look at one flowering plant and it was flowering in May, and we look 200 years later and it's flowering in March, that tells us a lot about change. And what we want to be able to do is do this across all plants. So how can we discover all of the plants, know where they are, where to find them? There is a paucity of botanists around. That takes a long time to describe a new species. It's an average of 35 years from collection to naming the species. We have a room at the New York Botanical Garden with 30,000 unmounted specimens with no names on them. There's a bottleneck. You have to get them to the right expert. And so we're taking this approach of using artificial intelligence, and this is a collaboration with Google, Cornell Tech out here on Roosevelt Island, and that we're using the Google's Kaggle platform. And there's a competition on now, so anybody who's doing machine learning algorithms, you still have time to enter. It doesn't close until June 4th, I think. And so what we're trying to do is to use artificial intelligence on one large plant family called the Melastomataceae to have an automatic plant identification algorithm. And then we're going to apply that. We have 6,800 unnamed melastome specimens alone in our herbarium, put that through the algorithm, and then get those more quickly to the expert within that family. So if we can use artificial intelligence to start finding out what the species are, and then using artificial intelligence to get those text records of where the plants are, when were they flowering, and get a more global idea about where plants occur and where we should focus our exploration efforts, we might be able to do a much more rapid exploration effort to try to discover all those 80,000 unknown specimens, those species, before they go extinct. Thank you.
Okay, I hope I do something half as cool as that. Okay. The project that I have that's part of the triennial is called the Tree of 40 Fruit. It's a single tree that grows 40 different varieties of stone fruit. So that's peaches, plums, apricots, nectarines, cherries, and even almonds that grow from one tree. The project started purely aesthetic reasons. It started as an artwork. I wanted to have what would be a normal looking tree, place it in a landscape, and then in spring when it starts to blossom, people would happen upon it and it would kind of create this moment of rethinking, and then hoping for the same thing when it produced all these different types of fruit. I create the trees through the process of grafting. I'll collect branches in February. I'll refrigerate them until spring when the tree starts to break dormancy, at which point I can use this grafting technique. And people tend to be kind of shocked when I do workshops on this because all I use is a utility knife and electrical tape. And so it's not very high tech at all. So I've known about grafting about as long as I can remember. My great-grandfather made a living grafting fruit trees. And I had never met him, but everybody that talked about him as if he was some sort of mystic or magician. It was always, they would invoke his name and then they would say, he knew how to graft. And it wasn't for years later. I mean, well, when I was I grew up on a dairy farm. So after being a dairy farmer for however many years, 14 years, I was very eager to find something that was the exact opposite of that, which was art. And so I went to art school, but I kept coming back to to grafting as a concept. Grafting appears in Virgil. It's in Ovid's Metamorphosis, at Shakespeare, talking about love. So I kept coming back, and then I eventually started to graft these trees. And so this is what a full-grown tree looks like after it's been grafted. I documented where all of the varieties are on the tree. And the trees are built, the colors aren't specific to any particular variety. They're specific to the particular year they were grafted onto the tree. I'll start a tree and it'll take 5 or 6 years to actually come to completion. So just to give you an idea, the tree that's in the garden is just in year 4. So it's like in its infancy. And that's actually the size that they'll be when I plant the trees. And typically what I do is I'll plant it that size, and I'll come back and visit for 3, sometimes even 4 years. That said, I still go to every single tree of 40 fruit that I have out there, which racks up the Delta Sky Miles pretty quickly. And so it's a project that was really, it's kind of strange to say, but it's conservation by way of the art world. Since this project really began as an artwork, it was art collectors and museums who had commissioned me to make the trees. And so most of them are held in those locations. And what I would do as I was invited to different locations, I would go out, I would research the varieties that originated or were historically grown in that area and source them from local growers, or work with the USDA to find the varieties and then graft them onto the tree. And I became fascinated, it's very much an art term of like creating an artwork in situ. And so I was thinking of these trees as becoming this agricultural history. Right? I could go into an area and I could take an entire orchard and collapse it onto a single tree. So I knew a lot about sort of like the morphology of the tree. I knew the blossom times. I knew kind of the phenomena of it, but I really had no idea about the history of what I was working with. So these are plums from just one tree of 40 fruit in 1 week in August, right? To give you an idea of the diversity. It was kind of funny. It got picked up as a meme online for a while, and it was like, is your marriage like the tree of 40 fruit? And like all these really strange things. And I was like, I really hope not, because that would be a mess. That's just a bad metaphor. So that, like all good memes, it led to an NPR interview. And so I did like morning edition, which for me, I'm like a college professor, so that's like, I think I peaked. So that was on a Saturday, and then the following Monday, I had the Department of Defense and the USDA contact me, and they were interested in talking about food security. But then through that process, I found out that I had one of, if not the largest collections of these fruit varieties outside of the USDA, which I still find incredibly terrifying, and made me really want to try to preserve them. So I started to research the history of each of these varieties to find that 50% of the yellow peaches that you find in the grocery store come from one seed that was brought from Shanghai to South Carolina in 1863. The apricots, they call it the Mormon apricot, was brought by Chinese immigrants to work on the Transcontinental Railroad. That there were peaches that were brought by Spanish missionaries into Mexico, grown along the Camino Real, and then cultivated by Native Americans for 150 years until they were sort of discovered in the U.S. And so there's, what I really started to see within these fruit is not just an attempt to preserve them, but an attempt to really preserve that history of those varieties. So I started doing everything from creating my own herbarium specimens to drawing the trees, creating my own botanicals. But then I eventually realized that if it was just me that was doing all of this, it was going to disappear pretty quickly. And that what I really needed to do is to get people involved. So I did things like this morning, having workshops on pressing plants. But even that wasn't enough. I'm like, I need to get the fruit in front of people. So I developed this idea for a public orchard, and then about 4 years ago, I started looking for about an acre of land in Manhattan, which was rather like, people were just like, that is so stupid. And I was like, it's gonna happen, you know? And eventually it did. So right now I'm working on an orchard of 50 trees on Governor's Island. Those 50 trees are going to contain 200 varieties that originated or were historically grown in New York. So to give you an insight, like my big thing is like this George IV peach. All right, so like somebody was in the, like walking on Broad Street down by the Staten Island Ferry, like about 1789, takes the peach pit, throws it between two buildings, it grows into a tree, produces fruit, somebody tastes that, and they're like, this is the best peach I've ever had. It becomes a major commercial variety in the 19th century and then disappears. And so what we're doing is we're actually bringing that, I started grafting it this summer. So it's out on Governor's Island right now. And the idea is, you know, to have people come to taste it and to start to care about those things. And I think one of the things that I believe I've learned in this project is that this group, you care about nature, you care about conservation. It's just a lot of us don't know how or what to do. And I think by giving people the means and the opportunity to do that through this orchard, it might make a difference. So that's it.
I love all these people, but I really don't like following any of them, to be very honest. Oh, somebody, and you already clicked me ahead too. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate that. That's the great thing about going last. You don't have to worry about all the other little things, hopefully. I shouldn't say that, actually. I'm a little bit ahead of myself here. But as I think, you know, Sam and Barbara and Patrick have all touched on, diversity or biodiversity, I think, is one of the major themes that, you know, you're feeling here today. And diversity is really, I mean, it's beautiful, I think, first off. It leads to creativity. And then beyond that, it also gives us options for solutions to some very major pressing problems that are ahead of us today. And I think with that, it sort of segues into a collaboration that we did with UBC Botanical Gardens. And this was something that, so actually, we love the fact that you're all here with us today because it's actually a very special anniversary for us, which we just in the midst of being busy day to day and not walking enough through the botanical gardens, or beautiful places like Cooper Hewitt, didn't notice until we actually stopped to be discussing today's lecture. And that was almost 4 years ago to the day that Patrick just fortuitously reached out to us via email after watching a film that we had created on the traditional Japanese tea ceremony and said, you know, hey, there might be some synergies here. Maybe we should do a project together, some sort of collaboration. So myself and Garrett, who you've probably seen floating around, we had breakfast with Patrick, and we both come from science backgrounds, so we were like, oh, this is going to be so fun. You know, it's been a few years since we've sort of had our roots in the science area. And, well, we left, honestly, like, and I mean, you've seen Patrick, he's a beautiful individual, but we were like this, like our eyes were like big saucers afterwards, because what Patrick really reminded us of, to take a stop and realize, was just the massive amount of loss of biodiversity that was occurring in the world. And again, given our backgrounds and everything, we left that breakfast a little terrified, but also, you know, a little more enlightened again. And it made us start thinking, well, what is it that, you know, how can we play a role in helping this towards the future? So that was literally almost 4 years ago to the day. And the culmination of our wonderful collaboration is The Garden of Secrets, and it's a documentary that's been produced. And we're just going to show a little trailer here for you, so just bear with us. Hopefully this works.
There was a period of time when people tended to think of the environment as having its champions. It's like the Superman and Wonder Woman that were going to be out there running the environmental protection agencies. That's over.
We need to use all of the tools that we have to deal with the situation that we've got ourselves into.
We need to understand why there are so many different plants and what each one does and why it is the way it is and what its specific adaptation is that we could learn from to design better buildings, better products, better cities.
We're in a period right now where it's the responsibility of each person who cares about passing on a beautiful, resilient, healthy planet to get out on the streets and fight for it.